Howdy, y'all, and good afternoon. Happy Friday. Sorry, I don't know why I did that, but, I tend to do things that not everyone understands. Speaking of which, we're going to do a class today on witches, which we talked about, but kind of popular witches in a way that have been a part of history, in famous writings, things like that, and kind of where the entire idea came up. Now, you ask me, no such thing. People are people. And some people were more extravagant, or interesting in some ways, maybe more dangerous in some ways, and they got labeled as certain things in certain cultures. So, but we're going to find out, and there's going to be 8 different ones that we get to find out about. So, let's get started. So, we have, let's say ancient mythology, which is, everything from the past up to now, and folklore is filled with witches. Again, it's just a term, including the Bible's Witch of Endor and Russian folklore's Baba Yaga. These enchantresses, that's a good word, are known for their magic and trickery, which is sometimes used for good and sometimes for mischief. So, let's talk about the first one, the Witch of Endor. And I know this was all inspired by the whole Wednesday thing, but, it's also a good thing to look back at history. So the Christian Bible has an injunction against practicing witchcraft and divination. And that can probably be blamed on the Witch of Endor. Isn't that the planet that the Ewoks are from? Anyway, and that can probably be blamed for the Witch of Endor. In the first book of Samuel, King Saul of Israel got in some trouble when he sought assistance from the witch and asked her to predict the future. Now be careful. It's kind of like that monkey's paw, be careful what you ask for. You actually might get it. Saul and his sons were about to march into battle against their enemies, the Philistines, which Goliath was a Philistine. And Saul decided it was time to get a bit of supernatural insight as to what was going to happen the next day. Saul started by asking God for help, but God said, mum, which just mum's the word, means didn't say anything. And so Saul took it upon himself to seek answers elsewhere. And again, this is the power of myth. This is all mythology. None of it's actually true, but it's a beautiful way to tell a story, mythology is. So according to the Bible, Saul summoned the Witch of Endor, who was a well-known medium in the area, disguising himself so he wouldn't know she was in the presence of the king. Saul asked the witch to revive the dead prophet Samuel so that he might tell Saul what was going to happen. Who was the Witch of Endor? Well, like many other biblical figures, no one readily knows. Though her identity is lost to mythology and legend, she has managed to appear in more contemporary literature. Chaucer makes the reference to her in the Canterbury Tales. It's a great book, by the way, if you ever want to read it. In the tale spun by the friar of... that's right, the tale of the friar to entertain his fellow pilgrims. The friar tells his listeners, "You tell me," said the summoner, "if true, do you make your new bodies always so out of the elements?" The fiend said, "No. Sometimes it's only some form of disguise. Dead bodies we may enter that arise to speak with all the reason as well as the Endor which spoke Samuel." Now again, let me ask you this question. I mean, you don't have to answer. But if you think about it, if it's in the Bible, And it's a power. Is it a power created by Earth, or is it a power created by God? If it's in the Bible, that a witch might disguise themselves and everything like that. Or is it a power of the devil? And that's the whole thing. Thing is, we don't really see anybody else doing anything like that at all. So, anyway, let's move on to the next one. Circe, which is the second witch of popular literature. One of the best-known mythological mistresses of mayhem is Circe, who appears in the Odyssey, which is written by Homer, the Odyssey and the Iliad. According to the story, Odysseus and his Achaeans found themselves fleeing the land of, oh my goodness, I guess Geronias, after a group of Odysseus' scouts were captured, don't quote me on that, and eaten by the Laestrygonian king, don't quote me on that either, and nearly all of his ships sunk by large boulders. The Achaeans ended up on the shores of Aea, home of the witch goddess Circe. That's never fun. Circe was well known for her magical powers, and had quite the reputation for her knowledge of plants and potions. According to some accounts, she may have been the daughter of Helios, the sun god. Helio means light, and one of the Oceanids, but she is sometimes referred to as a daughter of Hecate, the goddess of magic. Circe turned Odysseus's men into pigs, and so he set off to rescue them. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Willow. Check it out. There's a great pig scene in there. Before he got there, he was visited by the messenger of Hermes, who told him how to defeat the seductive Circe. Odysseus followed Hermes' helpful hints and overpowered Circe, who turned men back into men, and she became Odysseus' lover. Interesting. After maybe I read the... This is the Odyssey. I have read this. Who turned men back into men and after a year or so luxuriating in Circe's bed, Odysseus finally figured out that he should head back home to Ithaca, and his wife Penelope. The lovely Circe, who may or may not have borne Odysseus a couple of sons, gave him decisions that sent him all over the place, including a side quest to the underworld, which is Hades. After Odysseus' death, Circe used her magic potions to bring her late lover back to life. Okay, now number 3, the Bell Witch. So we typically think of folklore and mythology as originating in ancient, far-off places. But some of it is recent enough that it's considered urban legend. The story of the Bell Witch, for instance, takes place in the 1800s in Tennessee, right here in the good old U.S. According to the author, Pat Fitzhugh, of the Bell Witch website, there was a pioneer family on Tennessee's early frontier between 1870 and 1821. Pittsburgh explains that settler John Bell and his family relocated to North Carolina from Tennessee to North Carolina in the 1800s and purchased a large homestead. It wasn't long before some weird stuff began to happen, including the sightings of a strange animal with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Isn't that the, what's that thing called? I've heard it before. But it was out in the cornfields. Fast as fast can be, you'll never catch me. What is that thing? To make matters even worse, young Betsy Bell started to experience physical encounters with a specter. We're guessing it's that thing. Claiming it had slapped her and pulled her hair, although he originally told the family to keep them. But the Hasgod asked everybody to keep everything quiet. Bentley finally confided in a neighbor, who brought in a party led by more led by none other than the General Andrew Jackson, who was president of the United States at one point. Another member of the group claimed to be a witch tamer and was armed with a pistol and a silver bullet. Unfortunately, the entity wasn't impressed with the silver bullet, or apparently the witch tamer, because the man was forcefully ejected from the house. Jackson's men begged to leave the homestead, and although Jackson insisted on staying to investigate further, the next morning the entire group was spotted heading away from the farm. So Troy Taylor of Prairie Ghost says, the spirit identified as the witch of Kate Batts, a neighbor of the Bells, with whom John had experienced bad business dealings over some purchased slaves. Kate, as a local people began calling the spirit, made daily appearances in the Bell home, wreaking havoc on everyone there. Once Bill had died, though, Kate stuck around and haunted the house well into adulthood. I am quite skeptical about this. Alright, so I just remembered the head of a rabbit. I don't know if it's a body of a dog, but it is a jackalope. I knew I was close. I just didn't want to guess. But jackalope, head of a rabbit, weird creature, fast as fast can be. You can never catch me. Jackalope. Okay, number 4. We're halfway through. Morgan Le Fay is our next literary being. If you've ever read any of the Arthurian legends, so King Arthur, the name Morgan Le Fay should ring a bell. Her first appearance in literature is in Geoffrey of Monmouth's The Life of Merlin. Oh, that's right. Written in the first half of the 12th century, Morgan has become known as a classic seductress who lures men in with her witchy wiles, and then causes all kinds of supernatural shenanigans. That's a good word, shenanigans. Christian de Troyes, the Vulgate Cycle, describes her role as one of Queen Guinevere's ladies-in-waiting. According to this collection of Arthurian tales, Morgan falls in love with Arthur's nephew, Guiomar. Unfortunately, Guinevere found out and put an end to the affair. So Morgan exacted her revenge by busting Guinevere, who was fooling around with Sir Lancelot. That is the story. Morgan Le Fay, his name means Morgan of the Fairies in French, appears again in Thomas Mallory's La Morte d'Arthur, Morte, means death, in which she was unhappily married to King Urien. At the same time, she became a sexually aggressive woman who had many lovers, including the famous Merlin. However, her love of Lancelot was unrequited. And apparently Lancelot was supposed to be some really good-looking man, dashing and all that, hero-wise, and a lot of people really were looking for him, and apparently Morgan Le Fay was as well. But really, it just sounded like she was somebody who was attracted to him. I don't know if you're going to call that a witch. Sounds far-fetched if you ask me. Okay, the next one is Medea. So as we see in the story of Odysseus and Circe, Greek mythology is filled with witches. When Jason and his Argonauts went on a quest for the Golden Fleece, they decided to steal it from King Aestus and Colchis. What Aestus didn't know was that his daughter Medea had developed an attraction to Jason, the head of the Argonauts, and after seducing and eventually marrying him, the enchantress helped her husband steal the Golden Fleece from her father. That sounds like some shady people, not so much witches. Medea was said to be of divine descent, which usually means that there was some, back in the day they believed in several gods, and there was some divination in them, in that somewhere along the line there was a god that had parented a human being. So they were like half god, half human. And so Medea was said to be and was the niece of the aforementioned Circe, born with the gift of prophecy, which is seeing in the future and knowing what might happen. Medea was able to warn Jason about the dangers that lay before him in his quest. After he obtained the fleece, she took off with him on the Argo, and they lived happily ever after for about a decade, 10 years. Then, as often happens in Greek myth, Jason found himself another woman and cast Medea aside for Glauce, the daughter of the Corinthian king Creon. Not one to take rejection well, Medea sent Glauce a lovely golden gown covered in poison, which led to the death of both the princess and her father, the king. In revenge, the Corinthians killed 2 of Jason and Medea's children, just to show Jason she was a good and angry. Medea killed 2 of the others herself, leaving only his son, Thessalus, to survive. Medea then fled Corinth on a golden chariot sent by her grandfather, Helios, the sun god. Okay, number 6, Baba Yaga. Right, so in Russian folk tales, Baba Yaga is an old witch who can be either fearsome and scary or the heroine of a tale, and sometimes she manages to be both. So I like the story already much better. Described as having teeth of iron and a frightfully long nose, which, we always get kind of those, when it comes to the folklore of witches, you get that, the big nose and the, like, warts and things like that. And Baba Yaga lives on the edge of the forest. Again, typical of folklore witches, which can move around on its own and depicted as having legs like a chicken. Baba Yaga does not, like many traditional folkloric witches, fly about on a broomstick. Instead, she rides around on a giant mortar, which she pushes along with an equally large pestle. So pestle and mortar. That's interesting. If you've ever seen pestle and mortar, it's like this big bowl that's usually ceramic but made of really good stone, and then a pestle, which is just to grind out herbs. Interesting. Rowing it almost like a boat, so she's like using the pestle to row around. Sorry, the imaging is wonderful. She sweeps the tracks away from behind her with a broomstick made of silver birch. In general, no one ever knows whether Baba Yaga will help or hinder those who seek her out. Often, bad people get their deserts through her actions, but it's not so much that she wishes to rescue the good as it is that evil brings its own consequences, and Baba Yaga is simply there to see punishments meted out. All right, our next one is La Befana. Where are we? Okay. So in Italy, the legend of La Befana is popularly told around the time of Epiphany. What does a Catholic holiday have to do with modern paganism? Well, La Befana happens to be a witch. According to folklore, again, it's lore or myth, on the night before the fast of the Epiphany in early January, Befana flies around on her broom, delivering gifts much like Santa Claus. She leaves candy and small gifts in the stockings of children who are well behaved throughout the year. On the other hand, if a child is naughty, he or she can expect to find a lump of coal left behind by La Befana. So that's where my mom got the lump of coal thing from. And sorry, let's see. Give me one sec. Yeah, so this is like after Christmas. early January. Huh. Could be used for my birthday. So, La Befana's broom is more than just a practical transportation. She also will tidy up a messy house and sweep the floors before she departs for her next stop. This is probably a good thing since Befana gets a bit sooty. Soot is what is in a... Oh, I'll be right back. And so, soot is just the remnants, like, like there's a flue on a fireplace that you need to open so the smoke actually blows up the chimney. If that stays closed, you close it after the fire's out so that you don't have cold air coming down the chimney. But if you don't open the flue and start a fire, I've done it before, it's not fun. But it will, there's a bunch of soot, like just the ash from all of the, the fire embers will get on your walls and everything like that, and you have to clean all the walls up and everything like that. And it's definitely not fun. But so with La Befana's, she gets a bit sooty because she does come down the chimney, much like Santa Claus. And it's only polite to clean up after oneself. So she cleans up after herself. She doesn't want to leave a big mess, which none of us should do. She may wrap up her visit by indulging in a glass of wine or plate of food left out by parents as thanks, much like Santa Claus, except for the wine thing. I think he drinks milk. I don't know. Some scholars believe that the story of La Befana actually has pre-Christian origins. Oranges. I'm so sorry. Origins. The tradition of leaving or exchanging gifts may relate to early Roman custom that takes place in midwinter around the time of Saturnalia. Today, many Italians, including those who follow the practice of Stegheria, celebrate a festival in La Befana's honor. So there you go. Well, okay, there's only one more. So, Grimhildur. And a lot of people say Grimhilda. In Norse mythology, Grimhildur, or Grimhildi, was a sorceress married to King Gioki, one of the Burgundian kings, and her story appears in the Volsunga saga, where she is described as a fierce-hearted woman. Grimhilda was easily bored and often amused herself by enchanting various people, including the hero Sungundur, who she wanted to see marry her daughter Gudrun. The spell worked, and Sigurdur left his wife, Brynhild, or Brynhildi. As if that wasn't enough mischief-making, Grimhilda decided her son Gunnar should marry the spirited Brunhild. So she's messing with his family. But Brunhild didn't like the idea. She said that she would only marry men who was willing to cross a ring of fire for her. So Brynhild created a circle of flames around herself and dared her potential suitors to cross it. Sigurdur, who could see cross the flames safely, knew that he'd be out of trouble if he could see his ex happily remarried. So he offered to switch bodies with Gunnar and get across, and who had enough magic to make the body swapping work out. Grimhilda, of course, and Brynhild was fooled into marrying Gunnar, but it didn't end well. She finally figured it out. She had been tricked and ended up killing Sigurdur and herself. The only one who came, that's just a sad story, tragic. The only one who came out of the whole debacle relatively unscathed was Gudrun, whose malicious mother ended up marrying her off to Brynhild's brother Atli. So that is the story of the folklore of different witches that are famous throughout literary circumstances, and maybe people actually experience this. I'm guessing not. But anyway, it's interesting to find out, like, there's a power of myth. There's a Joseph Campbell, and there's a lot of power in these stories. It's more something that's kind of like a teaching lesson of how to avoid certain people and certain people that are doing wrong, but it's also to accept that something that might be different from you, as long as you can feel in your own heart, in your own mind, that people are people. And people do things differently than you do, or than I would do, or than anyone would do. And to really learn how to accept and learn from that as well. So again, this has been the story, the Wednesday, or the Witches of Wednesday, as I'm going to call this class. And I'm sorry it took a long time, but it's important. And y'all asked as well. So I will talk to y'all later. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you on Monday.